Okay, so for those of you missing class on Wednesday, I'm going to go over with the students about the next type of timed right essay that you'll encounter on the AP exam. We've already talked about rhetorical analysis and spent a lot of time first quarter doing rhetorical analysis. This one is the argumentative essay, so let's take a look at what that one is about. So the argumentative essay asks students to assess the argument sometimes of another human being. The rhetorical analysis one does, excuse me. The second type of essay asks students to make their own argument. So there's typically a claim that's given, and students have to choose a side and provide evidence to prove that claim. So you are also asked to address and counter the opposing side. So not only do you have to present your side, but you also have to say what the other side's main argument is and why that argument is wrong, or you say what part of that argument is right. So let's talk about argument. An argument is an opinion. Your opinion is a claim that is supported by evidence. So evidence can have a whole bunch of different ways that you look at it, depending on the nature of the argument, the purpose of the argument, and the needs of the audience. So you try to consider like what's the best evidence for the purpose, the argument, and the audience. It doesn't necessarily have to be an attempt to persuade. It can be an opinion supported by evidence. So you don't have to necessarily persuade someone to do, think, or act in a certain way, but instead it is implicitly persuasive because it gets us thinking about something the way you want us to think about it. So you have three different options typically on the AP exam. You are given an idea, and I'll show you some examples of those, where you're asked either to defend, challenge, or qualify what the person is saying. It's usually not a long piece of writing. It's usually just an idea that someone else has. So if you choose to defend that idea, you will support that position. You will explain why that position is valid. If you're challenging, that means that you're disagreeing, and then you're going to explain why your side is valid and this person's is not. And third, if you qualify, this is kind of like the middle ground. This is where you say what parts you agree with of the argument that's presented to you and what parts you disagree with. It's basically both of the two essays into one essay. It's a really good way of doing the argumentative exam, but it also can be very confusing because people who are grading your argumentative exam want to see you making a strong argument, and sometimes you can't do that when you're qualifying. So when you get presented with your argument, the first thing you want to do is you want to understand what the prompt is and what the prompt is saying. Make sure that you understand what their side is. Make sure you know what stand you want to do, and then you want to think of what evidence do I have that could support that claim. So brainstorm evidence that would exist to support whatever it is that you want to persuade people to do. So these are the things you want to do. When you read the prompt, ask yourself, do I agree with what the person is saying? Do I disagree with what the person is saying? Or do I think some is correct and some are incorrect? There's other words for defend, challenge, or qualify. They could be refute, they could be agree, they could be disagree. You just have to remember you're either defending, challenging, or qualifying the viewpoint. So evidence. Evidence from facts and statistics and quotations and dialogue, things from history, appeals to authority, all of the things that we've learned about in our rhetorical analysis, you have to bring into play in the argument. It's kind of like the rhetorical analysis is showing that you know how to break down someone else's argument. Now you have to use those same strategies that authors you read about first quarter and use those strategies in your own way. Okay, so planning the argumentative essay. Make sure you take some time at the beginning to decide your position. Take some time before you even start writing to plan your support and write a strong claim for your thesis. And don't forget, you have to also think about what is the opposing side going to argue. So first come up with your thesis statement. Then I usually suggest a pro-con list of supporting evidence. Then order the presentation of that evidence. I suggest emphatic order, meaning your second strongest idea you should write about first. Your third or least strong idea you should write about in the middle. And then your strongest argument is last, because the strongest argument is the last thing that people are going to read before they decide what your score is. And so you want to end with a bang. And then you want to make sure that you explain what the opposite side does. So opponents of this issue propose, however, those who disagree, on the contrary, words like that to transition into the opposing side and explaining what the opposing side believes, and in some cases why they're wrong. Okay, so for this case, our argumentative essay is going to be based on information that you already have. Since we switched over to talk about political arguments and political rhetoric, all of that information, including Niccolo Machiavelli's writing, the modern Machiavelli, the speeches by President Trump, President Obama, and another potential candidate for president or previous president, all of the commercials that you've looked at, all of that stuff you can use as evidence. Also, any of your own knowledge that you can use as evidence will be helpful to you on Thursday when you take this first argumentative timed right. However, when you sit down to take the AP exam, you won't know what the topic is about or even what kind of category the topic is going to be under. So you have to pull on all this different kinds of evidence that you could use to support that topic. Okay, so we're going to be using the classical argumentative structure for this timed right. The first paragraph, you want to introduce the idea, provide any relevant background information about the idea, define anything you think that needs to be defined, and then present your thesis. You want to get to the point as quickly as possible, and we'll kind of go over that a little bit. For your confirmation paragraphs, these are the paragraphs where you're going to present your main ideas, 1, 2, and 3. Remember, second most or strongest piece of evidence first, then weakest, and then finally your best claim and your best evidence that goes with it. So this is the biggest part of your essay. It provides the reasons and the evidence that supports why you disagree or agree with what the claim is being made. So it should show a logical development of the argument, and it should have evidence and emotional appeals as well. You want to make sure that you understand all the different rhetorical strategies that you could use and use them appropriately in that section. After you're done presenting your 3 claims, or 2 claims, but really well developed, you want to provide a concession and refutation. Okay, AP readers are always looking for people who can understand that arguments are complex. So providing the opposing viewpoint is a good way to go. And you don't have to disagree with the opposing viewpoint. That's what concession means. So let's say that we are arguing that in the world today, politicians are considered to be hypocrites and liars more than they are truth tellers. So if I'm arguing to defend that, I would say that they are hypocrites and liars, and I would give examples from all the things that we've read about hypocrites and lying and putting up a fake front. However, on the opposing side, I want to think about what would people argue if they said, no, I think politicians are honestly trying to do what's best for our nation and are not hypocrites and liars, and they're actually showing who they honestly are and what they hope for the country. Then I would give evidence that supports that. But I would say what I agree with on that opposing side and what I disagree with. Yes is the part that I agree with. Yes, I agree that sometimes politicians are being honest in what they tell the American public, but most of the time I believe that they're just trying to say whatever they can to get elected. Does that make sense? Okay. So paragraph development, you want to make sure that you have a topic sentence. You want to have evidence that supports your viewpoint, and you always want to comment on that evidence and explain why it helps support your view. So this is what we're looking at then for our concluding. This is big picture. Wrap up the argument. Make sure that you have your claim, provide some sort of new appeal, and explain why it's important. Refrain from doing a lot of repetition other than restating your overall claim. In the conclusion, remember you're always thinking about why is this important to consider today. All right, so that's the argumentative exam. We're going to try this tomorrow and see